And here's a look at the stories grabbing our attention right now. America's top military leaders are pushing NATO allies to send more military aid to Ukraine as Russia targets the country's critical infrastructure. We have team coverage of the war and how Western nations are responding. Plus, we're going to update you on shocking new details about attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Robert Costa joins us live with new information on a series of text messages between former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and members of his own party. China's so-called zero COVID policy is facing a new hurdle as attention shifts to an outbreak in Beijing. Our teams overseas walk us through the next phase of China's pandemic plan. And Twitter's board has tentatively accepted Elon Musk's offer to buy the social media company and take it private. We're going to tell you why some are now raising concerns about his push for free and unregulated speech on the platform. Meantime, actor Johnny Depp has wrapped up his testimony in the defamation case against his ex-wife Amber Heard, describing a volatile relationship but denying domestic abuse.
The monster was sobriety. The monster was trying to be sober because I was plagued by these requests to stop drinking.
So we'll recap the intimate details revealed in audio recordings and text messages, leaving many wondering if there were two aggressors and two victims in this case. Of course, we are going to start with Ukraine, though. We are tracking several critical meetings underway as Russia escalates its offensive. America's top military leaders are holding talks with NATO allies in Germany this morning. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin pressured European countries to send more military aid to the war-torn country.
Russia is waging a war of choice to indulge the ambitions of one man. Ukraine is fighting a war of necessity to defend its democracy, its sovereignty, and its citizens.
Right now, the UN Secretary General is in Moscow for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and this comes as top Kremlin officials warn of possible nuclear conflict. Later in the week, Antonio Guterres will travel to Ukraine. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Russian forces have targeted more southern Ukrainian port cities, and UK intelligence says a major eastern city has fallen. Here's Riley Carlson.
Ukraine says 5 train stations were hit by Russian airstrikes in the space of an hour Monday, not long after Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin left the country.
We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine.
During an interview with state-run media, Russia's top diplomat warned Ukraine against provoking World War III and said the threat of a nuclear conflict should not be underestimated.
The offensive that was supposed to take a maximum of a week has now taken weeks.
Britain's defense secretary estimates the invading forces have suffered considerable losses.
It is our assessment that approximately 15,000 Russian personnel have been killed during their offensive. Over 2,000 armoured vehicles have been destroyed or captured.
Today, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time since the war began in hopes of securing a ceasefire.
It's simply not feasible.
Ukraine's foreign minister says the UN leader should instead try to secure an evacuation of Mariupol, where the last of the city's defenders are holed up in this steel plant.
We are not afraid of the Russians. And second, we know how to fight and prevail.
Meanwhile, a team from the International Atomic Energy Association is examining the Chernobyl nuclear plant site today. It's the first inspection since Russian forces gave it back to the Ukrainians nearly a month ago.
So we want to take you live to Kyiv now, where BBC News correspondent Joe Inwood is standing by to talk a little bit more about the latest there. Joe, thanks for joining us. So let's start off with the UN Secretary General meeting with President Putin in Moscow today. How has that been received? And what is he hoping to accomplish with this meeting?
I think it's been received with some skepticism that anything can really be achieved. I mean, if you look at the distance between the two sides here, it's for even someone as senior as Antonio Guterres to find some way to get a compromise between them. Well, that's going to be very, very difficult. I should just draw your attention. It's happening right as we're on air. I'm in central Kyiv, and this is a statue that was erected in the 1980s, 1982, to symbolize friendship between Russia and Ukraine. And as you come to us live, they are in the process of taking it down. We're standing under this thing called the Friendship Arch. And this really, if you want to understand the friction, the fracture between these two neighbours, well, this is it. A statue which has stood here for 30 years is now coming down to you live on air.
Yeah, I can see that at least one portion of the statue has been beheaded at this point. If a picture tells, represents 1,000 words, that definitely says a lot. Let me ask you about the other major meeting happening. The Defense Secretary, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, meeting with NATO leaders. What more do we know about that meeting? And especially when we consider that Sergei Lavrov yesterday sort of blamed NATO for prolonging this war, and we have a defense secretary that's asking NATO to participate more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been the narrative that we've got from the Kremlin. This is all NATO's fault. Of course, it's seen very, very differently in the US, Europe and by Ukraine. We've got 40 defense ministers meeting in Ramstein Air Base, the German air base run by the Americans, and they're looking to try and solidify support for the Ukrainians, not just military support, of course, that hardware, the howitzers, the tanks, the anti-aircraft systems, but also diplomatic support and financial support. Just today, the United Kingdom government said it's removing all tariff for Ukrainian goods. And so we're trying to see across all of the different areas that would help the Ukrainians, we're seeing this support coming, a concerted effort from the Americans and from their European allies as well.
So I alluded to Sergei Lavrov's comments. Can we talk a little bit more about how Russian foreign officials are responding to these meetings?
With fury, with absolute rage. They have, ever since the Americans turned up, they've been pointing to the fact that the Americans are clearly now helping the Ukrainians. They say that the Americans are now fighting a proxy war, essentially that NATO is at war with Russia. Now, this has actually been the narrative that you've had from the Kremlin throughout. They haven't portrayed this as them versus Ukraine. They've set out to their people that Ukraine is a client state, that Ukraine is being funded by the Americans, and so the increased support that we're seeing from NATO and allies, it really fits into the narrative that the Kremlin's been putting forward all this time.
Right, exactly. Ben, thank you very much. Well, in a stunning move, a New York judge held former President Donald Trump in contempt of court for failing to comply with a subpoena from the state's attorney general. Trump will be fined $10,000 per day until he complies. New York Attorney General Letitia James is investigating the former president and his company for allegedly misleading banks and tax authorities about property values. Trump's lawyers say that they will appeal the decision. And a federal judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration from ending a Trump-era COVID border policy known as Title 42. Thousands of migrants have been expelled under the measure, which allows the U.S. to quickly deny people entry into the country based on COVID precautions. Now, Title 42 was supposed to be lifted May 23rd, but this latest development creates a new hurdle for the Biden administration. In response, the president is stepping up his offensive. He met with members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus yesterday to discuss their options moving forward.
Title 42 should be lifted and that we should focus on border management policy in order to make sure that they have the resources in order to move forward.
And this all comes as the Supreme Court gears up to hear arguments over the Remain in Mexico policy. The Trump-era rule requires migrants at the southern border to wait outside of the U.S. for their asylum hearings. President Biden ended the policy, but a federal judge moved to reinstate it, triggering a legal showdown. Today's arguments are expected to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern, so stay with us throughout the day for all the latest developments on that case. We have new details now on a case that has captivated the country. A Texas court delayed the execution of a death row inmate, Melissa Lucio. The mother of 14 was supposed to be put to death tomorrow for the murder of her 2-year-old daughter back in 2007. Lucio maintained her innocence for years, and her case triggered bipartisan outrage, with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle calling for a new legal review. Well, an appeals court decided several claims raised by her lawyers needed to be heard in a trial court. Lucio's attorneys believe that prosecutors may have suppressed evidence and used false testimony to convict her. The case now returns to a lower court. President Biden is issuing his first round of pardons as president of the United States. 75 nonviolent offenders are expected to receive commuted sentences, and 3 additional people who were convicted of nonviolent drug charges will be pardoned. White House officials say all of this is part of a new strategy from the Biden administration to help fund people transitioning from incarceration to employment. Well, Beijing is cracking down on a new COVID outbreak with mass testing and neighborhood lockdowns. Coming up after the break, I'll speak with Elizabeth Palmer about all the latest developments and what this could mean for the rest of the world. Plus, newly released bombshell text messages between former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and other Republicans expose more efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Robert Costa joins me later this hour to break down the details. But first, it is 7:10 on the East Coast. Time to check your local weather.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Well, the time now is 7:14 a.m. in beautiful Miami, Florida. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis actually just signed a bill to create a statewide law enforcement agency to investigate, quote, voter fraud in future elections. It's the same time here in New York City. CBS News Mornings is back with a look at some of the stories that you may have missed while you were offline. The number of police officers murdered in the U.S. rose by nearly 60% in 2021. FBI Director Christopher Wray told 60 Minutes 73 officers were killed last year as violent crime increased across the country. Police in Michigan have identified the officer who killed Patrick Lyoya earlier this month. Authorities say Christopher Schur shot Lyoya while he was face down on the ground during a physical struggle. Schur is on administrative leave pending an investigation. And leading Republican candidates for Senate in Pennsylvania faced off in their first debate last night. Dr. Mehmet Oz and David McCormick are considered the race frontrunners and face several attacks from their opponents. Democratic candidates also met up for their second debate. The primary vote is scheduled for May 17th. The White House is rolling out an effort to make a COVID antiviral drug available to more people. The pill can cut down the risk of hospitalization or death by about 90%. Nancy Cortez reports.
I'm an individual who is high risk.
Ashley Ballou-Bonema tested positive for COVID on Easter weekend. As someone with cystic fibrosis, she knew it could be bad.
And in the world of CF, when we get a cold, whether it's, starts in our sinuses, inevitably it affects our lungs.
Her doctor prescribed an antiviral medication called Paxlovid, 2 pills a day for 5 days.
Within the first 24 hours, I really felt a difference.
Currently, Paxlovid is only available at about 20,000 sites around the country. But the goal is to double that within weeks by allowing participating pharmacies to order free antiviral treatments directly from the federal government.
To me, it's game-changing.
CBS medical contributor Dr. David Agus says the drug prevents the virus from replicating in the body.
I have seen patients of mine who, when I put them on Paxlovid, literally a day later, they feel dramatically different.
The FDA has only authorized Paxlovid for use by those 12 and up who have a high risk of developing severe COVID. But that's still about 60% of the adult population, including anyone with obesity, heart disease, or diabetes.
Even people who are eligible are not taking advantage.
They can by going to the government's one-stop Test to Treat website, where they can locate one of 2,200 pharmacies offering COVID testing, a medical assessment, and a free antiviral prescription, all in one spot.
And the notion that they can go to a pharmacy, test, and within 30 minutes, start a pill to fight the virus is really powerful, and I think is what's going to get us out of the COVID-19 pandemic we're in now and allow us to live with the virus.
Mass COVID-19 testing now underway in Beijing due to a case outbreak. There's fears that the city could face a lockdown, just like the one in Shanghai that's kept about 25 million people holed up in their homes for weeks. So for more on this, we want to bring in Elizabeth Palmer. Here we go, zero COVID strategy, right? So Shanghai has been under lockdown for weeks now, and now health authorities are watching the spread of COVID in Beijing. Obviously, the lockdown has not been working because we're seeing this virus pop up in other cities. What's going on?
It's hard to say that the lockdown hasn't been working because we don't know how fast the virus would have spread without it. What we do know is this Omicron variant is hugely, hugely contagious. And so it's not surprised that it's creeping across the country. You know, once a handful of people had it, it's pretty much going to be everywhere soon. That seems to be the case in Beijing. So Shanghai, as you said, in its 4th week of lockdown. The cases there are coming down. And they are rising in Beijing, but it's a different order of magnitude. You know, Beijing had 33 cases today, 33, 70 since the weekend. But that's got authorities quite alarmed. On Sunday night, they said, right, we're going to test everybody in this one area of Beijing. You can think of it as, say, as the Manhattan of Beijing, the really central business district and so on. And then by the next day, they were widening that testing regime. And by today, they had said they were going to test 20 million people this week. And some of them, several million of them, 3 times. So that shows you how alarmed they are. It may well quell the outbreak and without the need for a lockdown, and it may not. And that's what everybody is wondering.
I think it's really good that you pointed out the numbers because that's really the difference. And as you were talking, I was quickly looking up what the COVID cases were where I live in Philadelphia, and it's well over 500 new cases, just yesterday. So, but China wants 0 cases, and so that's why they're sort of taking all of this so seriously. In Shanghai, there were problems, though. There's a concern that Beijing may see a lockdown. And we know that in Shanghai, there were problems with people getting food. I have a cousin who actually lives in Shanghai, cousin by marriage, and she was sort of showing pictures of the food baskets that she had initially been getting, and they look pretty paltry. But now things are getting better. Is there a danger that we could see something similar happening in Beijing, though, if they have to lock down such a massive city?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I want to go back to something you began with, and that is total numbers. I think the big difference is that now in the U.S., millions and millions of people have been inoculated with this very good mRNA vaccine, and that's providing massive immunity. China hasn't got one. And furthermore, the very elderly are vaccine resistant, or they've just been inoculated with the homegrown variety of the vaccine. And that means that if this virus really took off, there could be a lot of deaths. And so China's in a rough spot. It sort of painted itself into a corner by not allowing foreign vaccines, and B, not allowing COVID to spread so that there's some natural immunity out there anyway. As for the food problem in Shanghai, you're quite right. The distribution broke down. There were protests and people were furious because they didn't get enough to eat. In Beijing, they are really trying to head off that public anxiety. And you can see it in the tone of the press releases from the city administration. They're saying, don't worry, we've got grocery stores double stocked. We've ensured the supply of pork. They specified we're going to have enough food for everybody. Clearly, A, trying to stop panic buying now, which we saw a little bit on the weekend, and B, they want to reassure people in the case of a lockdown that they're not going to go hungry. Because everybody in Beijing, you can be sure, saw those social media videos of Shanghai and people actually going hungry.
Yeah, definitely. Liz Palmer, thank you very much. Back to Ukraine now, and Russia is working to cut Ukrainian supply lines. Moscow targeted at least 5 train stations yesterday. Meanwhile, there's a fierce battle underway in the eastern part of the country, and Russia's foreign minister is issuing new threats about the risk of nuclear conflict. Charlie D'Agata is standing by in Dnipro, Ukraine, with more. Charlie, so good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, well, the Russian military says it struck 90 targets overnight and killed 500 Ukrainian soldiers, destroyed dozens of military vehicles. Those numbers can't be verified, but what's clear is that fighting has intensified all along the front line.
There's been no rest for the firefighters of Kharkiv. Ukraine's second-largest city has been among the hardest hit in the past 24 hours of Russian bombardment. A shell-shocked and bewildered 94-year-old woman asks whether the war is over. It's the latest onslaught from a Russian advance stretching along a 300-mile front line in the east. Some of those who managed to escape the fighting head here to a shopping center in Zaporizhia.
It's the reality of a country at war that you can buy fabric softener in one aisle, have a refugee tent in the parking lot, and a cafe that's been turned into a first aid center.
Fedor Zubkov says he lost his wife in Russian shelling and is now struggling to cope mentally. We started dating when we were 15 years old, he said. She was my first love. At a nearby military hospital, we find Nazik Nativ after stepping forward to fight when the war broke out. The 27-year-old radio host from Lviv found himself right in the middle of the most brutal frontline fighting in the Donbass region. An artillery round on Saturday tore through both legs and his arm.
Did you think maybe you weren't going to survive?
I thought I lost my leg and wouldn't be able to play soccer, he said. First thing I asked was whether I could play soccer and fight again.
You want to fight again?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Of course, because it's my land. It's my country. It's my motherland.
Now, we asked whether he told his mother how badly wounded he was. He said not yet. He didn't want to worry her, and she's the type of person who would travel more than 600 miles from Lviv to the front line to come see him. Anne-Marie?
Well, I can totally understand that as a mother. Let me ask you just a couple more questions. You spoke to several people sort of in that shopping mall area. What else did they have to tell you?
Yeah, you know, that shopping mall was weird. It was surreal, and you kind of get used to that. Here in Dnipro, you know, they've got all kinds of defenses that are set up, and that's certainly the case in Zaporizhia. But there is where they're collecting most of the people who are coming not only from places like Mariupol and parts of the south, but also eastern Ukraine. And that man that we were speaking to who lost his wife, he was 36 years old, and you could see the kind of condition that he was in. He says he's dropped all kinds of weight. He said he was tortured by some of the Russian-backed separatists there. I asked him if he was getting any psychological help for what he was going through. He said no. Having said that, there are tons of volunteers who are at that center who said they felt like they needed to do something, certainly because of what was happening in Mariupol. The people that have been coming out of Mariupol specifically because it's been battered for more than 2 months, they just want some bread. They just want something to drink, and they want some place to stay. In terms of that, there are a lot of people, a lot of families who are just opening their homes. We spoke to a woman with 3 young children. I said, well, where are you going to go now? They said, actually, we've been invited to a home here. So Zaporizhia, it's one of the biggest cities in the southeast that isn't under Russian control, and Ukrainian families are just opening up their homes, the hotels, anywhere they can in order to help people out. It's interesting to note here that the people that are wounded who are coming from the front, they're getting a sort of triage in Zaporizhia, and then they're moved to other hospitals. And the reason for that is they want to keep the hospitals open for what they're expecting will be an influx of the wounded from the fighting that's currently underway.
Wow. So while that is happening on the ground in Ukraine, we have all these high-level meetings that are happening elsewhere. Now, Vladimir Putin has not met with President Zelensky yet. He hasn't met with anyone from Ukraine yet, but he is meeting with the UN Security Secretary General, today. I'm wondering how, people in Ukraine feel about that meeting.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of anger, to say the least, from the Ukrainian government and from President Zelensky himself, saying, why are you going to Russia first? Why are you going to Moscow before you come here? The Secretary General is due to come here on Thursday and will meet with President Zelensky and top leaders of the Ukrainian government. President Zelensky says you have this the other way around. You should come here. You should look at the destruction that Russia is responsible for. Look at the deaths. Look at the thousands of wounded. Then go to Moscow, then speak to President Putin and say, what are you doing about this, and make it stop. So President Zelensky, of course, he's happy that progress is going ahead. He has said multiple times he's willing to meet with President Putin directly. He's all for any kind of diplomatic channels to make the war stop here. But when he found out that the Secretary General was going to see President Putin first, the person who is personally responsible for this conflict as far as Ukrainians are concerned, that's the wrong way around. Should come here first. That would send the message to President Putin and to the rest of the world who's in the wrong here.
Charlie, thank you very much. Well, Elon Musk and Twitter have reached a multi-billion-dollar deal, one that could potentially transform the social media platform. We're going to tell you what you need to know later on this hour. And tonight on Red and Blue, the team is tracking high-stakes races across the country as Republicans try to win back the House and Senate in the upcoming midterms. You can stream all the latest developments in our 6 p.m. Eastern hour. We will be right back.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I'll have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Welcome back to CBS News Mornings. The time now is 7:32. Let's get you caught up on some of the news that you may have missed. Several critical meetings are underway as Russia escalates its offensive against Ukraine's infrastructure. America's top military leaders are holding talks with NATO allies in Germany and are urging European countries to send more military aid to Ukraine. A federal judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration from ending a Trump-era COVID border policy known as Title 42. Thousands of migrants have been expelled under the measure that was set to be lifted on May 23rd. And a New York judge has held former President Trump in contempt of court for failing to comply with a subpoena from the state's attorney general. Trump will be fined $10,000 per day until he complies. His lawyers have promised to appeal. Newly unveiled text messages between former President Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and Republican lawmakers reveal more details about efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. They include a message from Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene raising the idea of then President Trump declaring martial law to remain in office. Robert Costa has been following all of this for us. He's joining us from Washington. Robert, they were blowing up his phone, as they say. So let's talk about these text messages. Give us a little more insight into what these text messages reveal.
These text messages, first reported by CNN and confirmed by CBS News and obtained, they really are a revealing snapshot of what was happening inside the West Wing before and during and after the January 6th Capitol attack. What you saw are so many Republicans texting Mark Meadows, saying to him, try to calm down the violence. But so many of these Republicans were also involved in planning the legal and political operations behind the scenes that were part of the whole January 6th episode.
So let's talk a little bit about the text messages from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, because within these text messages, she is telling him that some GOP members are suggesting that Donald Trump should declare martial law. She testified under oath just last week. And what we heard from her about this, because she was questioned directly, was nothing. She couldn't remember.
Those comments will continue to receive scrutiny, as they should, because whenever someone says something under oath, especially if they're a sitting member of Congress, it's in the spotlight. And she said she didn't recall. That's an answer that doesn't provide clarity about what exactly happened. The text messages are documents. Documents, as a reporter, you always look for them because they can be much better than someone's recollection in explaining what exactly was happening. And there are still so many unanswered questions here. She references a private group chat of how Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill discussing martial law, which is using the military to help keep then-President Trump in power. We don't know much about this private group text. I was talking to a source yesterday who had seen some of these text messages at the time and said that it's a big problem because a lot of lawmakers were on these chains in different exchanges talking about different ideas after January 6th and just days before President Biden took office, trying to figure out ways, different schemes to keep him there.
So it has been months, actually, since the House found Mark Meadows in contempt of Congress. They sent a referral to the Justice Department. Where does that stand at this point in terms of criminal charges?
TBD. Steve Bannon, the former chief White House strategist, has been pursued by the Department of Justice, indicted for criminal contempt of Congress. But you see the Department of Justice in its own way moving forward on January 6th. They're not moving forward with Meadows at this moment. Never like to predict, and that has frustrated my House Democratic sources who would like to see more action. At the same time, you do see the Justice Department pursuing sedition charges against many people involved, allegedly, in the attack on January 6th. And you see them with a grand jury investigating many different aspects of what was going on before and after the attack. But we just don't know enough yet about the DOJ. We know a lot more about the House Select Committee.
Yeah, and we're probably going to find out even more because I know we only just saw sort of a portion of the text messages. There's probably much more to come. Robert, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, Washington may be dealing with political storms right now, but other parts of the country could soon be dealing with significant weather storms. Let's bring in meteorologist Jordan Steele. From our partners at the Weather Channel. Jordan, what areas are expected to be getting bad weather this week?
Well, Anne-Marie, thanks to our virtual view technology, we're able to transport you outside of our Atlanta studios and take you right here to Red Hat Amphitheater in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, today starts off pretty good. We got sunny skies, and then things change this afternoon. The clouds roll in, and the rain starts. Wish I would have brought my umbrella. So today's going to be a day where you probably want to pack the rain jacket or the umbrella if you're going to be into the Carolinas, let's say East Georgia. Augusta is included in this, and all the way out into the Delmarva Peninsula. In fact, this is the zone where we got to watch for severe weather and bigger rain totals to kind of blast through as the storms could bring a little potency with them once we get into the afternoon hours. Because this morning, it's relatively quiet. I mean, we've got some showers crossing over Appalachia. Light in nature, of course, might pick up an inch. Could see some spots that pick up maybe a little bit more than that just because of the upslope flow potential. But watch what happens 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now we start to get in some of the storms around Columbia and Charlotte, and that'll race east into Raleigh by dinner time and the Delmarva Peninsula, where we can maybe bring in some wind damage and isolated hail threat. But it's just an afternoon threat. It all pushes offshore, and really that's about it. So again, umbrella, rain jacket, second half of the day, you're going to need it if you're in this zone. And Anne-Marie, you could catch all-day coverage featuring our virtual view technology on the Weather Channel television network, including the latest on climate and sustainability as we explore our planet, our future on Pattern, weekdays at noon.
Jordan, thank you very much. I almost want him to get an umbrella. It looks so realistic back there. You can also get the latest on the weather in your area on the CBS News app. Our app gives you access to all of our CBS News national and local streams for free, anytime, anywhere. We are following all the reaction from Elon Musk's $44 billion Twitter deal. The richest man in the world now controls one of the most influential social media platforms on the internet. We're going to have more on how Musk's free speech fight could play out into Twitter's future. Until then, we are going to take a quick break, which means you have 3 minutes to download the CBS News app. It is free. You can download it on all your devices. Our app gives you the best of CBS News all in one place. Before we get to the break, though, we're going to leave you with some late-night laughs from our friend James Corden. He addressed Elon Musk's Twitter purchase during last night's show.
Imagine having so much money, you think it's a good idea to buy hell. Musk's bid was approved today by Twitter's board of directors, which I assume consists of crying Michael Jordan, keyboard cat, and the distracted boyfriend guy. Now, this makes sense, I guess. Musk is doing, he's used to, he does the impossible. That's what he does. He sees something impossible and he makes it happen. He's building the most sought-after electric car, blasting off into outer space, and now, somehow, making Twitter even worse.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I'll have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Inflation hit a 40-year high this month as U.S. consumer prices soared nationwide. While we associate inflation with higher groceries, gas, and other costs of living, some might be wondering, could inflation break your nest egg? So joining me now to discuss retirement planning is Rebecca Walser, president of Walser Wealth Management. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
So the general wisdom has been to expect about 2 to 3% inflation when you're planning for retirement. Do you think that remains true, or should people plan for even higher inflation rates?
It's a great question. And I think right now, yes, we should, because we're in the midst of it, right? And we actually have it. But if you look at what happened between 2021 and 2022, a lot of employers stuck with the traditional 3% sort of average annual increase, because at that time they could say, well, maybe it's temporary, it's not really impacting long term. And, obviously employers don't want to get locked into an inflation adjusted salary if then the numbers come back down. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we're seeing being used as retention bonuses, after the Great Resignation of 2021, we had so many people exit the workforce that you already saw higher wage increases year over year, but also employers implementing a retention bonus to get people to stay. And this is a way they could also, account for inflation, but not lock that price increase in forever on that salary.
That's interesting. So, this might be a good time to negotiate a higher raise, perhaps, or a bonus like that you're talking about. But what other strategies besides that can viewers keep in mind as they plan for their retirement? And for those who are actually much closer to retirement, do they need to worry about recent volatility in the stock market?
Yes, and that is probably the largest concern that we have for people that are very close to retirement, because what we know is if you experience a substantial loss within 10 years before retirement, that can really delay or impact your retirement plans for the rest of your life. It can have that big of an impact. So it is very important for people that are that close to retirement to really be cautious in this time where the market is coming back, where we do see inflation, we do see a lot of, geopolitical unrest. These are all things the market does not like and will probably make the market pull back to its mean. And a mean is looking at the last 2 years before Corona. So that could be a substantial pullback. And we definitely do not want people to experience that are close to retirement. So what I would say as a general principle, without giving specific advice, is to maybe look at being very cautious and even maybe move your portfolio temporarily to what we call TIPS, which are basically Treasury inflation protected securities. They're Treasury inflation protected bonds, Treasury bonds, and they will help mitigate the inflation impact, at least for the short term.
You talked about employers, doing things to retain employees. Are they also doing things to help when it comes to retirement?
I haven't seen a lot of new ideas yet. The retention bonuses are really kind of the first thing. I think employers are just right now grappling with how do we keep this staff and not make them, pants on fire with inflation where they can't afford their, they're just basically covering their rent, their food, and their groceries. How do we deal with that immediacy of the problem, because that is very immediate? And then I think the retirement benefits are going to be coming later on, where we're really trying to deal with these immediate problems right now of making sure people have enough, but yet we don't overlock in and lock in inflation rates that maybe might come down, and we hope they come down.
Right. Yeah, we do. Fingers crossed. Rebecca, great information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This Money Watch segment has been brought to you by BDO. People who know BDO.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
And the First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
you would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that carbon gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yes.
We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.
So even though it looks fairly busy, this is really just a fraction of what business was like prior to COVID.
Last week, there was another large hotel chain that 18,000 were let go.
I haven't seen any jobs that are even close to what I was making.
We're trying to keep things as normal for our kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son.
And I see every day people losing their homes, having to leave Las Vegas.
If I have to start over somewhere else, I have to start over.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
Well, the time now is 7:50, and this is a live look at New York's Times Square, home of CBS Mornings. Tony DeCopel is standing by with a preview of the show. Tony, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Anne Marie. Ahead on CBS Mornings, a stunning twist in the story of a man who spent 19 years on death row before his murder conviction was overturned. Now the state of Florida wants to send the 64-year-old back to prison. Also, Elizabeth Moss is known for her breakout roles in The Handmaid's Tale and Mad Men. Now, the Emmy Award winner joins us to talk about her new series. It's called Shining Girls. And actor Terry Crews has a new memoir out. It's called Tough, and he's going to be here to talk to us about his journey of self-improvement and trying to overturn stereotypes about what it means to be a man. Calls himself a recovering toxic male. Know any of those? We'll see you at 8.
We will see you at 8. Provocative conversation. Johnny Depp has wrapped up his testimony on his defamation case against his ex-wife Amber Heard. Now, Depp arrived in court in Virginia yesterday. Before he took the stand, he alleges that his ex-wife defamed him and caused him to lose several lucrative movie roles after that she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post describing herself as a victim of domestic abuse. Here's part of the back and forth that happened in court yesterday.
Ms. Heard wasn't the only one who had a problem with your drinking, correct?
Sir, if anyone had a problem with my drinking at any time in my life, it was me. The only person that I have ever abused in my life is myself.
In fact, you tried to hide your drinking from your daughter, Lily Rose, didn't you?
Objection, relevance. What's the relevance?
When your nerves are pushed.
Well, the actor is suing for $50 million. He calls any claims by Heard grossly exaggerated and maintains that he was the one who suffered in their relationship. Well, she is countersuing him for $100 million. Elon Musk has reached an agreement with Twitter to buy the platform for $44 million. The richest man in the world has said that he wanted to privatize Twitter because he thinks it's not living up to its potential as a platform for free speech. That's sparking concerns of Twitter becoming a haven for disinformation and hate speech. But free speech might not be Musk's only incentive.
I think that core is influence. You know, we've seen celebrity presidents, and now we see celebrity CEOs, and that's maybe what Musk cares more about now than ever is this role of influence, power, and celebrity.
Meanwhile, some are expressing concerns about Musk, noting that he used Twitter to bully critics and reporters who have written articles that he disliked. or about him or his company. Nikki Batiste has more.
It took 11 days before Twitter's board unanimously approved billionaire Elon Musk's bid for the company. Immediately after, Musk tweeted to his nearly 84 million followers, "Free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated." And Elon Musk-owned Twitter could look significantly different, with fewer ads, less content oversight, and some type of edit button. Owning Twitter would also give him the power to address one of his biggest criticisms of the social media platform, its limits on free speech, which he addressed in this recent TED Talk.
We want to be just very reluctant to delete things and have just be very cautious with permanent bans.
Musk's initial offer was met with resistance. Twitter even voted to adopt what's called a poison pill to prevent Musk from gaining a majority stake. But proof of financing and no better offers led to a deal.
This makes Elon Musk at the top of mind of everyone in the world. Twitter isn't the biggest social network in the world, but it's certainly the buzziest and maybe the most influential.
Musk's own behavior on Twitter has gotten him in trouble. This 2020 tweet led to his electric car company losing billions in value, and these 2018 tweets ran him afoul of the SEC.
Is there any danger in a Twitter owned by Elon Musk?
Misinformation and disinformation could be amplified considerably. So the reality of an Elon Musk-owned Twitter is that a number of these bad actors could run rampant across the social network.
The deal is expected to close in 2022, subject to a vote of Twitter shareholders and certain regulatory approvals. Twitter's stock ended the day up 5.6%. Nikki Batiste, CBS News, New York.
It is 7:55. Here's a look at what's coming up today. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is holding critical meetings with allies in Germany today. He spoke earlier condemning Russia's ongoing offensive and urging European countries to send more military aid to Ukraine. Back in Washington, the Supreme Court will hear arguments today focusing on the Biden administration trying to end the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy. The president rolled back the measure, but a federal judge quickly reinstated it. That is set for 10 a.m. Eastern. Plus, Jen Psaki and White House COVID response coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha are set to hold a briefing this afternoon. They'll address the state of the pandemic and the U.S. response moving forward. You can stream that update at 3 Eastern. And before all of that, we're going to be talking to the founder and CEO of the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice about a Texas court's decision to issue a stay for Melissa Lucio. She's a mother who was scheduled to be executed tomorrow. You can stream that conversation around 9:30 Eastern. If you are heading out the door, take us with you. You can access all of our CBS News national and local streams for free, anytime, anywhere on the CBS News app. CBS Mornings is next, and I will see you in an hour.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place, and you're getting kicked out.
Yes. An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The COVID economic shutdown hit Las Vegas harder than any other major city in the nation.
It's decimated the entertainment community.